Hi there everybody, Dave here from HeyUGuys, and welcome to yet another Mouth Off where we get to discuss some cool things. And today that cool thing, as you may well have seen in the title of the video, on the thumbnail of the video, or even in the background of the image behind us, Batman Begins. Today I'm joined by the wonderful Scott Davis from HeyUGuys.
Hello.
And the awesome Sean Wilson from Cineworld Blog.
Hey guys.
As always, do let us know what you think of this video once you've watched it. Let us know what you think of Batman Begins. Don't forget to like and subscribe in wherever the button that I put somewhere on the screen is. And check out Cineworld Blog, which is cineworld.co.uk/blog. So, guys, Batman Begins. It's 15 on the 15th of June. It's probably the US release date is my guess. I can't believe it's 15 years old. I watched it again last week in preparation for this chat. It still holds up. It's still just as good as I remembered it to be. What are your memories of Batman Begins? And what did you think of it when you first saw it? And if you've watched it again more recently, what do you think of it now?
I've seen it thousands of times, so I don't need to revisit it. So much so that I on the open. So this is the story for you. On the opening day that it came out in the UK, which was the day after, it was June the 16th. I remember quite vividly. Me and my friends booked 5. We went to 5 screenings back to back to see it because we were so excited.
5?
So we went at like 10 in the morning, and then we saw it at like 12:30, and then we saw it at 3. But then we were supposed to see it at 4 something, I think. But we bailed because we were all like falling asleep in the screen because
you bailed.
So long.
Bailed.
I bailed.
Good one.
So we went across the road to the McDonald's, and then we came back for the 8:30 screening because all of our friends had joined us. So there was like 28 of us who'd gone to this Friday night screening to go until Thursday night screening to see it. So it was really, really exciting. And for us as Batman fans, you know, and I'm sure all you guys would agree that we'd been waiting so long to see a proper Batman movie, that there was excitement, but also a little bit of not skepticism, but because of what happened with the other movies, and because obviously we'd had X-Men and Spider-Man and everything else, it was whether this indie filmmaker, and he still was a kind of an indie filmmaker at the time, Christopher Nolan, could turn his attention to a big multi-million-dollar franchise that was really starting and going in a different direction and being very kind of true to the comics, but also tell it in a slightly heightened reality. So it wasn't a superhero, which Batman obviously isn't a superhero, he's a comic book hero, but all of that excitement and the fact that it looked, you know, the suit was cool, it looked dark, it looked gritty, it looked exactly how Batman should look. The excitement was, I remember the excitement being quite big, but then once people had seen it and the reviews started to come out, it was, you know, as we all discussed, it was a bit of a game changer, wasn't it?
Like you said, Scott, I remember thinking that the most recent film prior to it was Batman and Robin, which is really quite astonishing when you think back, like that was the most recent movie in the franchise. To think that that's what Christopher Nolan had to redeem the franchise for, it's an astonishingly big mountain to climb. And I'd seen Memento and Insomnia by that point, and I think the way that he was able to graft that sense of sort of serious philosophical intent onto it was unlike anything anyone had ever seen at that point. I mean, to some extent, I suppose the first X-Men had grappled with the issues of identity and so on, but just to see it done in such a commanding way, and the fact that it was dark, it was properly brooding, not just in terms of its look, but in terms of its theme. I just remember being blown out of my seat thinking, wow, that's just like nothing I've ever seen before in this genre.
Well, I was going to say Christian Bale, you know, was excellent in the role, but what did you think when you first heard that he was cast in the role?
I was so excited because again, me and my friends, we were quite close at the time, so we used to watch movies and stuff together. We were such huge fans of American Psycho that when we saw American Psycho, you could see, not specifically, but you could see kind of echoes of Bruce Wayne. And that if you're going to tell Bruce Wayne properly, that's kind of how the facade part of Bruce Wayne, you know, the fake part of Bruce Wayne, that's, you know, his mask that he uses to be this playboy, this kind of, you know, philanthropist and ladies' man, all that kind of stuff. It's all a facade. But some of the Patrick Bateman stuff was very close to what Bruce Wayne should be. So when we'd seen that, we thought this guy would be great as Batman. But then obviously a couple of years after, he'd become this really skinny guy because he made The Machinist. Everyone thought, Christ almighty, how is this? Because I think at the time, even Christopher Nolan really wanted him but I had to really convince the studio, because when they met him for the first time, he was like, well, how is this guy ever going to be looking like Batman? He's really skinny. And they went, no, he's doing a role. It's just he's a bit he's a bit method, is Christian Bale. And he put on loads of weight and became really, really big, and then they thought, oh my god, he's too big. But I think his personality, and because of what he did in not just in American Psycho, but a couple of the other movies. I mean, the film isn't great, but he's quite good as one of the bad guys in the Shaft remake / sequel / quasi reboot, whatever. His smarminess is quite good in that, so you can see echoes of the Bruce Wayne character in him. So I think that's what Nolan saw in him, and also it was again similar to Michael Keaton. His eyes had so much kind of going on, and there was a lot of mystery around them. That's for Batman, that's kind of key. So even though there was criticism about Michael Keaton, it was that kind of sold you on, this is the kind of guy that would do this because of his history and because of his upbringing and what happened to him, but also because of how Batman's supposed to be. You can see so much going on underneath that you don't quite know what's going on. So I think when I heard the news that he was in the mix, because there was loads of other guys in the mix, he went around everybody.
Can you remember?
So there were screen tests if you get the Dark Knight trilogy box set, which I think is deleted now, the collector's box set, there's a documentary on it. They talk about the screen. They show some of the screen tests. So there was Cillian Murphy was one of them. There was an actor called Ian Bailey. And then there was a couple of others that they don't show, but he'd spoken to other actors. So there was, if memory serves, because he was Warner Brothers, I guess, wanted him to speak to every young actor of a certain age. So that included Jake Gyllenhaal, that included Heath Ledger, loads of other people around the same age that he spoke to. But he obviously wanted Bale, but he had to kind of go, I guess, because it was a big gamble in some ways. Warner Brothers, they had to know that he was the right guy, rather than whatever. But there was those two on the DVD and the Blu-ray that shows you their screen tests, and they don't. You can tell they're not quite right, or not that they're not quite right, but you can just see how good Christian Bale was in his performance, not just as Bruce Wayne, but when he puts the suit on, because they all wore, in the screen test, they wore Val Kilmer's suit, so they could see what they look like in the suit. So it doesn't quite fit them all quite well, but you can just from his performance, and obviously he's had some criticism because of the performance and the voice and everything else, but you could just tell it's like he's Batman. It's got to be him. So I think all of that, I think he was the perfect choice.
Yeah, I think at the time that Batman Begins came out, I was starting to become reacquainted with Christian Bale's back catalogue. So Empire of the Sun and All the Little Animals, which is a weird little indie movie, I think, with John Hurt. And I agree with Scott that he does Inner Conflict brilliantly. I think that's the main theme about all of Christian Bale's and seeing Batman Begins, and I love the way that Christopher Nolan was able to harness that, and Christian Bale can flip between, on the one hand, the suave billionaire for whom money isn't an option, who is outwardly quite smug and kind of full of himself, which is a very, very American Psycho, but then the way that kind of inner conflict is translated into a kind of outer superhero exterior, and the way that he weaponizes fear and uses it against the criminals in Gotham City, I thought was, it's the duality of the character. I think Christian Bale was very well served to represent that.
Not only was Bale, right for the role. I mean, I had forgotten until I watched this film again last week just quite how many well-known, prominent actors are in this film. I mean, Michael Caine, Morgan Freeman, Katie Holmes, Cillian Murphy, obviously Gary Oldman, obviously. I mean, the list goes on. Scott, for you as a crazy Batman fan, crazy in a good way. By the way, going back to how many times did you say you saw it in the cinema on the same day?
4 times.
4 times.
Yep.
I don't think I've ever seen one film in the cinema 4 times. So you saw it 4 times in a day. How many times did you see it the whole run?
I think I did 8 for Batman Begins, 8 for The Dark Knight, and 7 for The Dark Knight Rises. I think that was about. But it was with different people. And if memory serves. So Batman Begins didn't go down too well because I had a serious girlfriend at the time, so I had to try and convince her that that's what I was doing with my day off, and it was just like okay. And then she came to the evening screening as well. I think she was there, and loads of people came with us in the evening screening Batman Begins. So it was a bit mad, but we were a bit sad. When was this? 2005. I would have been 22.
Sad or
nothing else to do,
depending on which way you look at it.
There was no sport, there was no football that day. We had someone do something, I suppose.
Yeah, and no corona, just no football as well.
Yeah, none of that. Yeah.
So I was just saying, Liam Neeson, I didn't even mention him. Ken Watanabe. So I mean, all those names. How were you feeling about, I guess, each of them individually? Like Gary Oldman for me was just the perfect, head cop. The way he worked with Batman was brilliant. I mean, Michael Caine as Alfred was wonderful. And then there was the whole. For me, I wasn't familiar with the sort of how Batman got his skills, and so I love the Liam Neeson, Ken Watanabe section where he sort of goes off to find himself after his parents are killed. Did it fulfill everything you were hoping for? I mean, by the time you saw it the fourth time at the end, were you just loving it more than ever?
Yeah, well, the first time it was kind of a blur because it was so much excitement, and we'd seen obviously the trailers and stuff. So the first time was kind of a blur for us. That's why we wanted to go at least one more time, but we obviously went a few more times. But I remember when they were announcing the cast bit by bit that it was interesting. Obviously, because it was so secret, there was lots of falsehoods about who was playing who, and obviously, it's been 15 years, so we can obviously talk about the fact that Liam Neeson plays Ra's al Ghul, really, but he wasn't obviously supposed to. They kept it quiet. It was Ken Watanabe who was playing Ra's al Ghul, but actually he wasn't. But I think from listening to Nolan, he was very keen to do what Richard Donner had done with Superman, which was to fill the cast out with great actors that would help kind of sell the idea of this world and this character and this city and the way that it was going to function. I mean, even people like Tom Wilkinson, who you can see there on the screen, Rutger Hauer's in it, who's fantastic. Yeah, and then there's all other little bits and bobs. There as well, and obviously then Morgan Freeman's in it, and straight away that you raise the kind of not just the class level, but just the it's so much easier for him to tell his story when it has such I think the only, and then obviously when Michael Caine was in, I think it was rumor at the time was him. I think Anthony Hopkins and Patrick Stewart maybe were in, but when people say it was Michael Caine, it's like it was perfect, absolute perfect casting. And I love the story that he tells that he went to his house on a Sunday or something and sat in his front room and gave him the script. And he said, "Oh, okay, I'll read it in the next couple of days." And Chris Nolan was like, "No, you need to read it right now." So he sat and had like a cup of tea with his wife or something while he read it. But I think the only thing for at the time, and this isn't a criticism or anything, but I think obviously Katie Holmes' inclusion was a bit strange because she wasn't, I guess, renowned as an actress, but she'd done a few really, like Christian Bale, and a few cool indies at the time. So he saw something in her that was good. But I think it just his eye for casting is fantastic, and the fact that he managed to bring all these guys in just adds to the authenticity of what they're trying to do. Even though it is a comic book, there was a real kind of grounded element to it that really adds to the kind of the structure of the movie and what the story they're trying to do and the themes and everything else. I think is you couldn't have wished for a better cast, could you?
My main takeaway from it was I loved the fact that with the casting, they'd made Liam Neeson the villain and Gary Oldman the good guy.
That I didn't even really approach it from the perspective of being a Batman, because I'm not really a comic book reader, but I saw all these fantastic actors in it. I thought, wow, there's going to be something of value in this with all these great actors.
And I thought that was a really clever thing to do, to cast Gary Oldman as the dignified, the Jim Gordon character, the person who is morally upstanding, the most morally upstanding person in it. And the fact they introduced Liam Neeson as the guy who apparently is the benevolent mentor, but there's something quite dark going on underneath. And then it hits you with that twist at the end. It's like, oh wow, they've actually used Liam Neeson's like physical stature and height and presence to actually suggest somebody who is going to bring Gotham City to his knees. And Gary Oldman is the decidedly non-gadget-tastic cop who is trying to scramble on the ground level to try. And I thought that was lovely. I really liked how they did that.
Yeah, it's a very, very cool switch, and it's very Nolan, isn't it? At the time we were all kind of like, you don't really expect some twists in movies, but in comic book movies you tend to get, especially with how they particularly done this, in no disrespect to Spider-Man or X-Men, but they tend to build up in the same, they have the 3-act structure, but they follow the form, which is at the end, there's going to be the showdown with the villain, etc., etc. Well, this one does, but it does it in such a way that's feels very fresh and very different. So I think that combined with who it is. But I mean, out of all of them, and I think Nolan sold Michael Caine on this by saying that if you play Alfred will probably you'll steal the film, and it's what he does. I mean, Bale's great and everyone else is great, but Michael Caine's performance is just incredible.
I like this meme that I found. Why do we fall?
Oh yeah,
so that we can learn to pick ourselves up again.
Yeah, but it's just great that he delivers it as Michael Caine, isn't it?
Yeah, well, that's the thing you said. You quoted it the other day. Yeah. What was it where he says never? You do it well. What is it?
Oh, he says never. Yeah, he goes never.
He goes
never.
It's like never.
And all the way through, he gets more and more emotional. He gets more emotional as the films go on. It's just like it's just.
But yeah, him, and then even Morgan Freeman. He's not in it a lot, but he has such a part to play in it. They all have parts to play in it, which is really good. And for a big summer tentpole movie, that doesn't always happen when there's so many characters. Even you look at Batman and Robin, criticized for having so many characters, but it's because they just don't have anything really to do apart from to just do silly things. Whereas in this, everyone, no matter how big or how small the role, has something to add to the story and to the world and to the kind of creation of.
Yeah, you really get a sense of it's like a bustling metropolis, isn't it? There are a lot of characters, and you kind of oh wow, I really do get a sense of a living, breathing city. Which I don't often, but I don't necessarily think that on a character level, maybe in the Burton ones, maybe more through the design, which is more human, I think.
Yeah, and Katie Holmes didn't come back for the sequels, did she? She was replaced by Maggie Gyllenhaal. I was trying to search the other day about why she didn't come back, and there's no sort of, absolute reason. I guess she just chose not to, did she? Or I'm surprised she wasn't bound.
From what I'd read, she chose to do it different. She'd signed on to do another movie instead, and they were kind of ready to go. But there was a lot of talk. I don't know. No one knows this, but there's a lot of talk about the Tom Cruise effect, maybe, or something, but I don't think that's true. I think it was genuinely that she just wanted to make another movie. But also, I think I read somewhere that she, again, this is all rumor, that she wasn't a fan of the fact that Rachel obviously dies in the second one. But I don't really know. But it's a shame because she is quite good in the movie. She's not amazing, but I remember us talking about it afterwards. Actually, she was. She held her own pretty well.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I did. I mean, she wasn't out of place at all. I thought she was very good in it. I think what I read, she said she'd love to work with Nolan again. So it's interesting that she decided not to do it. I've got a nice behind the scenes shot here actually of them shooting a scene.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great scene.
That's awesome.
So I guess now that we've titled this, how it changed comic book movies forever. So guys, how has it changed comic book movies forever? Go. Scott.
Batman Forever. I think it just from a if you look at it from the top downwards, I think it gave a great legitimacy to comic book movies in the sense that they could be films. They weren't just entertainment. They could be used as a way of telling real stories about real people. If you look at The Dark Knight, even more so, very social, very political, very economical, very about the world, about terrorism, all that kind of stuff. But which is stuff that if you look at something like Superman at the time in 1977 was all about hope and about, I think, the Vietnam War had finished, all that kind of stuff. It was at a time where people wanted a bit of hope and a bit of inspiration, and Superman was perfect for that. But I think with what Nolan did was he took the concept, but just removed the comic book element and just treated it like a real thing. The character is a real guy. All the characters are real things. This is a real world, slightly heightened, but real. And I think people were quite surprised that he was allowed to make the movie like that. And I think they've all followed. If you even look at the Avengers, they're very, the MCU rather, they're very out there, there's aliens and all this kind of stuff, but there's such a grounded quality to them and the characters and the core ideas and the story of everything in the same way that they talk about politics, they talk about economy, and they talk about social issues and, racism and all those kind of things and terrorism, that it gave it such legitimacy that people don't think of them as kind of popcorn movies anymore. They are legitimate movies. I mean, obviously there's some that because of their nature you have to, you couldn't do you couldn't make Howard the Duck the same way you make Batman. Obviously Howard the Duck's a bad example, but there's certain comic book movies that you have to treat as comic books. But with the MCU, and even if you look at Batman v Superman and Justice League, that tries to do Nolan stuff where it talks about Superman as an alien, but how has he influenced the world, and talk about him as a terrorist, or whether he's good or bad, and how that's going to affect the economy, and all those things. It doesn't quite work in them, but I think his take on it was let's not think about the comic book, let's not think about selling toys, let's not think about sequels and anything like that, because he never thought about sequels until he found the story. It was always about, let's tell the best story we can tell, but we want it to have a legitimacy to it. So I think that's what has changed a lot, and I think a lot of people have followed suit. Again, not every comic book, you can't tell. That's my big thing with Superman. You can't tell Superman like Batman. They tried to with Man of Steel, and I don't think it quite works, even though it's quite enjoyable. But I think for some things like Iron Man and some of those guys, you can do it. So I think he changed the kind of legitimacy of it, and told everybody, these don't just have to be flaccid popcorn movies just about action scenes and about selling toys. It can be a legitimate movie if you just take out the comic book element and put all this stuff in. It's still the same movie. It's just we're trying to be a bit more realistic and tell the things that happen in the world, but through the visor of a guy dressed up as a bat. But some people do crazy things these days, don't they?
Yeah, I think from my point of view, the idea of empowering, as Scott said at the beginning, an indie director to tackle a massive, great big tentpole movie, I think that opened the floodgates. And you think of that's a routine trend now. But back when Batman Begins came out, it was not that long ago. Thinking about it, you look at what happened with Gareth Edwards going from monsters to Godzilla, and you think, wow, that was a huge jump. And I think going from Following to Memento to Insomnia and then to Batman Begins, it's an interesting art for Christopher Nolan. Like the fact that somebody saw those early, brooding, largely non-linear movies and went, wow, this is the right person to graft a new sense of identity onto Batman. And I think that routinely happens now. You see big studios taking chances on directors who've made indie films. Think of like Jordan Vogt Roberts with Kings of Summer, then he goes on to make Kong Skull Island, and obviously it doesn't always work. There's obviously the notorious instance of obviously Solo, where they tried to take on Phil Lord and Chris Miller, and then it didn't quite work out. But I think in terms of legitimising directors with real credibility, with real artistic credibility and critical kudos, and bringing them onto a genre that would often have been sneered at, and allowing them to bring their personality into it, I think it was revolutionary for its time. Batman Begins was.
I think that something to point out as well is he didn't just direct it; he wrote it with his brother. He produced it. It was proper. Like, this is his baby. It's quite incredible when you look at it that way. And do you know what hit me first as the movie starts? It's the score. Scores get me. And I was thinking about this the other day, like when I watched it. There's that famous thing about how Jaws, if I said to you, duh, duh, straight away you go, Jaws. But and how hard it is to use two notes to evoke emotion. But actually, Dark Knight does it, I think, with two notes. It's that do, it's just absolutely epic. And yes, they've put huge amounts of reverb and whatever else in it, but oh my goodness, what a score. What did you think of the score when you first heard it? Can you remember how you like the goosebumps you probably got, Scott, in the first time you watched it, and then by the fourth time you watched it?
Yeah. Well, I think the that's another thing that was kind of not a fear of fans, but obviously Danny Elfman's score is so signature to Batman, especially the opening music from Batman and Batman Returns. And for me as a teenager, obviously that, and the score from Batman Forever and Batman Robin, which I think is one of the kind of positives of those movies. They're so significant, as you say, that they're very much, if you hear the first few notes of Danny Elfman's Batman theme, you're like, well, that's Batman. So I think there was that. But when you get Hans Zimmer, and because it was him and James Newton Howard, they both kind of took bits of it. And James Newton Howard is known for more dramas and thrillers and stuff like that, whereas Hans Zimmer obviously is very big. So to combine them together, I think was fantastic. But you're right, the score is really, really impressive. And I think they just get better as they go through the three movies. But it's a very different, it's almost like they're scoring, a drama or a thriller or something. They're not scoring a big comic book movie. They're really getting into the the crux of the characters and the themes of the story, rather than just, obviously there's bits like the Batmobile chase where it's all like, very action pumpy and everything else. But I think that changed a lot of things as well, because it wasn't just about the big kind of broad beats and big signature tunes. It was about just having the music match the story and that match the characters and the narrative. And I think they did that really well over the three movies, especially when the theme, the Joker theme and the Bane theme, if you think about those things as we went through the movies, they're so iconic now. The chant with Bane, people are like, what is this? But then when you see the movie, you're like, I get it. I get what it is now. I understand what it is. And that's synonymous with Bane. And then the Joker's theme is very piercing. It's like, just like him in the film, he just kind of pierces the movie every time he's on screen.
Yeah, I think that for me, the important thing, particularly in the first two scores, I think is the mediating influence of James Newton Howard, who obviously only scored the first two movies. He didn't do The Dark Knight Rises. That was obviously just Hans Zimmer. And I think that Newton Howard's mediates that kind of onslaught from Hans Zimmer, because Hans Zimmer is famous for that kind of muscular, very processed, almost like quasi-industrial, the idea that you have an organic orchestra and then you bulk it out and you sort of manipulate the sound and you distort it. And I think that James Newton Howard, he gets the more intimate moments when you have the emphasis on the piano and the woodwinds, and I think that balances out what would otherwise be a very, very deafening experience in both Batman Begins and The Dark Knight, because in The Dark Knight James Newton Howard did the Harvey Dent material, which then warps and darkens. And I think not that I want to, we've all three of us have been on track so far, not that I now want to experience a divergence, but in terms of the scores, I actually think that The Dark Knight Rises is the worst of the three scores, because it's just Zimmer sort of thundering away in the background. What I wouldn't have given to have had James Newton Howard just to moderate it slightly. And I don't know if I should say the thing that I read online about the Bane chant, because it might ruin it for both of you. I'm not sure whether and then not say it. Okay, fair enough. So it's meant. Someone pointed out online that it's obviously Sanskrit, Deshi Basra, I think it is, and someone pointed out online that it sounds like a group of people yelling fishy pasta, and I think once that's heard, it's not unheard. Then, particularly in the prison scenes, it does sound like it's an uprising to the sound of fishy pasta, and it's almost like the Mandela effect. It's like, oh dear. But yeah, apologies for that if I've just undercut Hans Zimmer.
That's awesome.
That's good.
So I guess 15 years on, I mean, like you said, you've seen this film thousands of times, Scott. It does seriously hold up. I've forgotten how good it was until I watched it again last week. I mean, will we still be talking about it in 15 more years? Do you think 30 years on, we'll still look back on this fondly as an absolute classic? I personally do.
I think it will be very much like Dick Donner's Superman, which I think is no disrespect to Tim Burton's Batman, because I think it's a good Batman movie. It's just a bit muddled, but in terms of the definitive kind of, if you go back through the series of characters, the definitive Superman movie is Dick Donner's first Superman movie, because like Nolan did with this, he just got every single note of that movie almost perfect, or as perfect as you can possibly get without, it's a movie after all. I think we'll be talking about this many years to come. I think we talk about it even more now because of the unfortunate way that obviously Ben Affleck's Batman went, in terms of that they tried to do something a little bit different and it didn't really work, and then obviously Justice League kind of compounded it more. So obviously there's the circumstances around Justice League which may or may not be rectified next year, in terms of the quality of that particular movie, which you'll see. But I think this is if you talk about Batman, and Batman's been around for decades now, isn't he? 1939 or whatever it was, 1939. We'll still be talking about this in 30 years, depending on. But I think there may be competition depending on how Matt Reeves's movie comes out, because again, that's going to be very, very different. But in terms of the definitive Batman movie, I think this is as close to it as you can possibly get. And it's, for me, I still think The Dark Knight is the best of the three. I think that just pitches, just beats it by an absolute hair hair's breadth just because of Heath Ledger. You know, that's no disrespect to anybody else in the other movies, but it's just, you can't get around the fact of just how iconic and how magnificent that performance is from someone that people just were not expecting from. You know, when it was cast Heath Ledger, it's like blah, blah, and then he just did that. So I think that beats it only slightly, but I think Mark Kermode always talked about the kind of sincerity of this movie, and I think that's really true. There's a real kind of sincere nature to tell the story in the best possible way, and it's, yes, you have the big kind of moments and stuff, but the characters and the story are so rich and diverse, and they tell a really interesting story about a guy, and you know, the guy that's, you know, at the end of his rope and wants to do something about it. It's a bit extreme, obviously, because it's a comic book, but I think in terms of the definitive Batman and his history, I don't think this will ever, Batman Begins, I don't think will ever be beat by anybody, and that's no disrespect to the best filmmakers out there. I just think it's a fact. It's
tricky for Warner Brothers because they've got, you know, these ever since Dark Knight. So obviously, like you said already, we've had Ben Affleck's Batman, and they're just not as good. And let's face it, I don't know what they're going to do to make a film better than the Dark Knight Rises trilogy. I
think that's the beauty of it, though, is that Nolan got in and out, and he said, no, you know, it's 3 movies and that's it. You know, they would have loved, I'm sure, for him to make Batman movies for years and years and years, like the Fast and Furious or Harry, you know, like the big franchises. But, you know, I think Batman's such a character that you can do. He's one of the most flexible characters there is, in that you can do Batman Begins, but you can do, for better or for worse, you can do Batman and Robin or Batman Forever or Batman Begins or Ben Affleck's Batman or the new Batman, which is going to be very, very different. I think the flexibility of it is such, if you just pick certain bits, but in terms of the actual kind of through narrative of his story, I don't think this will ever be beat, ever. I don't think.
No, you may well be right. Well, okay. Closing thoughts then. Go on, Sean. What? How do you want? I don't really know what I want to ask, but how do you? What does this film mean to you? And what would you say to anyone who's never seen it before?
Yeah, I'd say that it was a real maturation in terms of what comic book movies can do, and I think that nowadays we take for granted so many of the things, so many of the templated elements that this movie laid down. This film was so responsible for so many of the, you know, the theatrics and the stylistic approaches that comic book films have in the modern age, and I think that just in terms of its bravery and its willingness to respect an audience's intelligence, that absolutely deserves to be a forever champion. And that can be said of all of Nolan's movies, as Nolan is very, very famous for that. He expects an audience to keep up, and although, you know, Batman Begins has it's told in non-linear style, but it's not like Memento. You don't have to like scramble your mind in order to keep up with it, but there is a real commitment to respecting an intelligent audience's ability to stick with it and to stick with the darkness. And I mean, I'm so glad that it was a big hit as well. I'm glad that audiences did respond to it, because there's no guarantee that would have happened, and it did. It struck a chord, and it allowed Nolan to develop into this, you know, extraordinary filmmaker with remarkable amounts of creative control, and he's worked his way into this position, which is probably quite unprecedented in modern films, and the budgets that he's been given to work with, because he shows that he can get the critical kudos and the box office. He's worked his way into this remarkable position that allows him to make films like Inception and Interstellar and Dunkirk, and quite experimental movies. So yeah, I think it's a testament to his integrity and his vision. It's a fantastic film.
Yeah, I agree. I think that I don't think we would have, you know, we talk about obviously the MCU being a big thing now. I don't think we would have had the MCU without Nolan, in the sense that he did so much for the genre in terms of, just as I said before, treating it as a real thing, not treating it like a comic book movie, treating it about the characters and about the story, and then having all the theatrics on top of that. And I think it will endure for a long time. I think people would have, you know, a lot of people would have liked to have seen more, but I think in terms of the trilogy, and again, as Sean said there, Nolan being able to do what he's able to do now, was able to say, no, I'm stopping at 3, you know, I'm doing a beginning, a middle, and an end, and then you do what you want after it, because I think we've said everything we need to say. We told our story about Bruce Wayne. Let someone else cock it, which they kind of did. I mean, I should preface that, but I think Ben Affleck is a really good Batman. That kind of Batman, a very old, very bruised, very broken Batman. I think he's really, really good as Batman, just in a pretty rubbish film. But I think that its legacy, like I said, I always come back to Dick Donner's Superman, and that still, even if you watch it today, it still endures. It still does everything so perfectly well. And while the world is very different now to what it was in 1978 or even in 2005, I don't think anyone will ever have that synergy of story and character and theatrics and being able to weave in all of these things about the modern world that we're living in now to such a degree. To put it into a Batman movie is pretty strange. And when you make a movie like this, and go back to that documentary, when you have people like Michael Mann and Guillermo del Toro and all these directors who are just like, I love Batman, but I never expected someone to make a Batman movie like this, or to be allowed to make a Batman movie like this, when it was always about selling toys and Happy Meals and t-shirts and getting the biggest star on the planet to be the villain. It was about legitimizing it and just treating it as a real thing. And it's opened so many doors for so many people, both in the comic book world, but also, as Sean said, about filmmakers being able to start and make indie movies. And then someone like a Kevin Feige or a studio saying, actually, would you like to come and make this movie, but make the movie more often than not the way you want to make it? Sometimes that doesn't ring true. But I think the funny thing on the documentary is they talk about all the Warner Brothers executives, and Nolan gave his pitch, and he gave like a 20-minute pitch, and they were just sold on it straight away. It was like the best pitch they'd heard, and they tried for a long time to get the movie made. And throughout the whole process, it wasn't until after they'd seen the movie for the first time that someone said, well, that was really good. Can you imagine if this wasn't very good? What would we have done? And it was the first time, apparently, that anyone anywhere in the studio had said, because they were so confident in him, because his take was so... And there was no script. He just told them what he thought he would. This is the movie I want to make. If you want to make it, great. If you don't, that's my pitch. Yeah. But no one mentioned it. And when they saw the movie, that was the first time they sort of said, my God, what if we rebooted Batman? It was really bad again. But thankfully, it wasn't. And I think they were equally shocked, I guess, because it was just even better than anyone anticipated. And then obviously we get the last two as well. So I think this will go down for many years to come, many years to come, but long after we're gone, I'm sure.
Let's face it, fair play to the Warner Brothers execs for giving it the green light, and actually confidence builds confidence. So, if a movie, if everybody does believe in you, then you're going to do a better job than if you're getting people moaning at you constantly. That we've seen, projects in the past where we do hear about, them falling apart because the studio just didn't trust the filmmaker and just got on their nerves so much that actually they've walked off. It happens more often than not. So fair play. Well, so that's sort of our thoughts on Batman Begins. I want to know if anyone's ever seen a film, the same film 4 times in the same day before.
Let us know. It's just me. It's surely just me. Unless one of my old friends is like, I was there with him.
I saw Jurassic Park twice at the cinema, and I saw Cool Runnings twice at the cinema. And to my knowledge, those are the only two films I've ever seen twice at the cinema. But that wasn't on the same day. That was, over
4 times on the same day. Yeah. I mean, it probably would have been. You probably would have realized it more if I hadn't said that I had a girlfriend at the time. That would have just been like, oh yeah, I didn't have a girlfriend, so I had nothing else to do. That's just how we were. That's how we rolled back in 2005.
Well, do let us know in the comments what you think of our little chat here. If there's anything you completely disagree, we've not even mentioned Cillian Murphy. I don't think any of us mentioned him once.
Oh he's great as the Scarecrow. And he's in all. He's the only.
The film is.
He's in all 3. Yeah.
Stuff.
Didn't even talk about Cillian Murphy, and he's in every single movie, which is fantastic, which is amazing.
He didn't even make the poster. Looking at the poster here, I mean.
I think because of the way that the old movies, the old movies with all the villains and like the Photoshop villains and everything, it was just about let's just have Batman on the poster, shall we? Just Batman
and some bats. Yeah, so cool. So do let us know in the comments. Do you like Batman Begins? Do you love Batman Begins? Are you obsessed with Batman Begins like Scott? And don't forget to like and subscribe. Tell your friends. If you like this video, do let us know so we can do more of them. And I guess we'll be back in a few years to talk about the 15th anniversary of The Dark Knight. Which how long after this did that come out?
3 years. 2008. So it'll be 2023.
We'll be back. We'll do a Dark Knight. It's absolutely chucking it down. I need to shut my window for my.
Yeah, that was what I was looking at as well.
But yes, take care, stay safe, and we'll see you on the next one. See you guys. Bye.
Ladies and gentlemen, you're watching Hey You Guys!
Hey You Guys, huh?
Hey, you guys.
Is that from the Goonies?
It is indeed, yes.
Nice.
Hey